Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and I am the host of this podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I am also a newly minted USA Today best-selling author of the novel Blank. I've created a whole community of book lovers around this podcast, a publishing company, reading retreats, a bookstore, and more. Learn more at zibbymedia.com or follow me on social at Zibby Owens or join the community at Zibby Readers. Jessica Fein is the author of Breathtaking, a memoir of family dreams and broken genes. Genes with a G. She's also an essayist, advocate, speaker, and host of the I Don't Know How You Do It podcast, which features people whose lives seem unimaginable and who triumph over seemingly impossible challenges. I was actually a guest on her podcast. Jessica is a working mother and a relentless warrior in the memory of her dynamic daughter, whom she lost to the ultra-rare disease MERF syndrome in 2022. Her work encompasses hope and humor, grit and grace, the tools that make up her personal survival kit. She's the mother of 3, who she and her husband adopted from Guatemala. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, and also for, by the way, already having me on your show as well. Breathtaking, a memoir of family dreams and broken genes by Jessica Fein.
Thanks for having me here.
Literally, your book, I was like, no, that's not going to happen. Oh, no, that couldn't possibly happen too. No. And then at one point, I literally said out loud, are you kidding me? All the things that have happened in your life, it's unreal. All the loss, all the stuff. I don't even know. Anyway, my heart goes out to you is all I'm trying to say here.
Thank you. And I have to say that, are you kidding me? I feel like I have turned to the skies and, just shouted into the air so many times in my life as well. Are you kidding me? Because, it does seem unimaginable, even to me as it's happening.
Oh my gosh. Well, if nothing else, what comes across, so much comes across, but the thing that is most apparent is the resilience that you have and the generosity of spirit, your endless love for those who you care about. It just pours off the page. There's nothing you wouldn't do for somebody you care about, particularly your children, as we saw in the book. But man, you're just, it's really quite astounding, your capacity for, getting back up again and all of it. It's great.
Thank you.
Maybe we should back up. Could you please tell listeners what your book is about?
Yes, people are like, what are you even talking about?
What are you talking about? Sorry. Stop.
So the book is the story of how my husband and I built a family, which was not exactly how we had originally imagined, which we thought would be the more conventional way. But we went through a lengthy infertility journey and ultimately made the decision and became completely enraptured with the idea of international adoption and adopted 3 children from Guatemala. And when our middle daughter, Dalia, was 5, she was diagnosed with an ultra-rare degenerative disease. Later, she got a secondary diagnosis, and she was one of 6 in the world with this double diagnosis. And so what happens in the story is we go from thinking the tough part's over, we've got our 3 babies, now we're going to go on to all the stuff we had always dreamed of, to having our entire world turned upside down as Dalia grew and learned and lost simultaneously, because a degenerative disease, for anybody who's been through it or knows anybody, is a particular kind of cruelty, particularly in children too. And when Dalia was 9, she became very sick and she lost her ability to walk, talk, eat, breathe without a ventilator. And from 9 to 17, that was our reality. Dalia was what was called an eyes-on patient, meaning myself or my husband or a nurse trained specifically in Dalia's care needed to have our eyes on her 24/7. Like you can't go to the bathroom kind of thing without bringing Dalia. And I will jump to the end, which is not any kind of morbid spoiler alert. Dalia passed away at 17, 2 years ago. From 9 to 17, we lived in this crazy reality of our house was like an ICU. And I tried to control the situation, as we as moms do, to fix the situation. When Dalia was diagnosed, I believed I would personally cure this disease that brilliant people who actually know what mitochondria are can't cure, and how I transformed into, we're not going to solve this. Like, this is not going to end with a miraculous cure. So how do we live in that context? And how do we create a life of meaning and joy? Because I had 3 kids and Dalia just wanted to be a kid. How do you do that? How do you live a life of, again, meaning and joy in that context? And ours was, of course, extreme, but I think it's something that, all of us, we're living in uncertainty. We're living in situations that are out of our control, and yet we want to have a life that's going to mean something and be happy for our kids.
I mean, how could it only have been 2 years ago?
2
Right?
years.
I mean, it feels like you have such a lens of looking back and making peace, and that there would be more distance because it all seems so processed. But maybe it's because you had so much time along the way to process because you knew it was coming. What do you think?
I think that's an excellent question. And both of those things are true. So in the first place, I was writing this book, much of it by Dalia's bedside. As Dalia became sicker, she needed a lot of rest. And mitochondrial disease, an energy deficiency disease. So, for example, if she was napping on the weekends from 2 to 6, I was at her bedside. Mind you, my husband and I were still working full time during this whole thing, but there was a lot of writing that took place at her bedside. And in fact, this book was done and was out on submission with a totally different ending. It was before Dalia died. So I had always envisioned this book ending at this very joyous scene where we figured out how to give Dalia a bat mitzvah. And in fact, again, I had been agented and in fact, was well along the process. And then I wrote the epilogue.
And it wasn't even just Dalia. And also, you included scenes like, how do you get from vacation in Florida to get an intubated patient back? And what are the logistics of this? And just the nuts and bolts of who is watching my other kids? And how do I get through this weekend? Who can I call to help me? Is there anybody? Why is the insurance company saying no? And just that desperation and frustration of giant companies being in control of our individual pain.
Yeah. And what you're alluding to, when we talked at the beginning about so much loss, is that the book starts with the unexpected death of my sister, who died when she was 30 and I was 27. And this was my best friend. And it was a sudden death. And along the way, I end up losing a lot of other first-degree family members as well. And so, first of all, at face value, this sounds like the most depressing book in the history of the world. And that's not what I'm hearing early readers are taking away. And I really don't want them to, because what I want is this idea that there can be light and laughter and joy and hope, and not in a Pollyanna way. Obviously, this is the worst thing. But again, it's creating a life in that context. And yes, so much of it was this idea that unnamed huge insurance companies were determining our fate, and we're trying to figure out how to suction somebody who can no longer swallow while also getting 2 kids to their baseball games, while also going to work in the morning and figuring out how to get nursing into the house, and right. And so it's a lot going on.
You referenced your kids at a couple of different points. One kid wandered away during the fireworks, and you had a brief note in the epilogue. And it sounds like maybe one of your kids is trans at this point, perhaps. Yeah. So tell me how the kids are doing, how they felt about your writing the book, and what it's like. I mean, it's not like you brought home a sick child for a weekend, right? This is most of their lives. Their sibling has been very, very ill and now has been lost, which is so sad. And I'm so sorry. So what has gone on with them?
Yeah. It's interesting because when I look back on it and I think, with some distance, is there anything I would do differently? Mm-hmm. And I feel one thing I do feel peace about is that we did the best by Dalia. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that. And I'm so glad I believe that, because that would be a whole other thing if,
Yeah.
But there is one thing I would do differently, and that has to do with the siblings. And for so long, my husband and I, without even really talking about it or planning it, put on this strong front for the kids. Mm-hmm. We felt like, we're going to have family dinner every night and we're going to go to the fireworks and do the things. And yes, Dalia's getting sicker. And yes, there's like a nurse and a personal care attendant with us and, a van of machinery, but, we're okay. We just felt like that was the best thing to do for our other kids. And one night, our eldest, who must have at that point been, I don't know, 15 maybe, came into the room and broke down, into my husband and my room and broke down, and essentially said, something's wrong with me, something's wrong with me. And we were like, oh my God. And what our child said was, I am so angry about what's happening to Dalia. I'm so scared. I pray and I pray and I pray and nothing changes.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys seem to be totally fine. What's wrong with me? And I was like, oh my God, because this whole notion of trying to show them that we were strong completely backfired. And I tell this story because I feel like I learned so much from it, and since have been so much more open and honest when I'm struggling about anything with my kids, in an appropriate way, of course, but realizing that we were kind of shutting them out instead of bringing them in. All of, we were good intentioned, but boy, were we wrong.
Mm.
So, the kids are really different in how they reacted and what their experience has been. My youngest is 2 years younger than Dalia, and so he went from Dalia very much mothering him, right? Dalia was like so caring. And, I have all the pictures of her giving the bottle to the baby. And she just felt like he was hers, like she was the mom. And she helped him learn how to write and was holding his hand and all of the things that a maternal big sister would do. And also it was so cute because when we brought him home from Guatemala, he was a huge kid. They were the same size. So I used to take them out in a double stroller and everybody thought they were twins. But ultimately for him, what he had to, so he was 7 when Talia got really sick. And then the situation got very reversed. So now he was really helping to take care of her. And he's just the biggest love in the world. And I think he kind of kept a lot of the mischief and silliness and normalcy in our lives because he treated her like you do a sister, So he would, whatever it was, bonk her with the stuffed animal or spray her with water, like do things that were normal and not like I have a fragile porcelain doll that I can't touch, right? So that's him. And then our eldest really helped with the caregiving. And then it was interesting, became an EMT. And I think that for in that situation, I actually really relied on JoJo because Dalia became, for the last 2 years of her life, frozen, meaning she couldn't move. She couldn't blink. She could not move. And so the physicality of taking care of her was really complex. Again, she was attached to a ventilator, so it was really high stakes. And JoJo was super strong. So JoJo would help me. JoJo, I mean, both kids were doing pretty intense medical care, which maybe I shouldn't publicly admit because there's probably something that's like not so great about that. But in any event, I would say that both of them are the most accepting, caring people. And I imagine it's because they grew up as Dalia's siblings. Maybe they'd be that way anyway. I don't know. But I mean, they're spectacular humans. And I think so often in these cases, siblings are heroes and grow into just these incredible humans.
Wow. You reference different pieces of Judaism throughout the book, and the number 18 to the bat mitzvah to the Brit, like there are just so many things all throughout. Talk about your relationship with Judaism now, and especially in the light of all of the hard things that you've been through. Has it made you question faith in general or any of that?
Yeah. And, I will say that all 4 of my immediate family members, my husband and my 3 kids, all converted.
Yes,
So,
I saw that your husband converted. That's right. I wrote that down.
Yeah. And the 3 kids, I mean, that was something because since they came from Guatemala, we did an actual traditional in the mikveh. For people who don't know what that is, that's the ritual bath. And that's a whole scary thing in and of itself because you got to dump them and their babies, So I grew up very much being Jewish is absolutely 100% core to my identity, to who I am. It's the context through which I kind of see things. However, I did not grow up religious.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's weird for a lot of people who maybe aren't Jewish or, haven't experienced this because it seems like, well, how can Judaism be that important to you, but you're not religious? But there's so much, and I don't know how you feel on this topic, but for me, it's so much about the people and the culture and the tradition, more so than, I go to synagogue every week, which I do
Mm-hmm.
not. So within that context, the belief in God was not something I ever really spent much time thinking about. So I didn't then rally against a God who was bringing all of this onto me in any kind of meaningful way. And I think a few things. First of all, I mean, while we're talking about it, the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner, decades ago. It happened that I went to school with Aaron Kushner, about whom that book was written. Aaron Kushner had a rare disease called progeria, which is premature aging, and Harold Kushner wrote this book about his son, which obviously became, one of the best-selling books of all time. So I had known that family, and then my sister dying really changed things for me so dramatically that I never really thought, why is this happening to me? Why would God do this to me? It was more, why is this happening? Why'd this happen to her? Any questioning that I had was about the people in my life who were dying and who were suffering, more so than like a woe is me. I was like, woe is them. Like, this is too much. But the one thing that I do write about is when my eldest sister was diagnosed with lung cancer, she truly believed she was going to beat the odds. I mean, stage 4 lung cancer is not very beatable. And she believed she would. And she said to me, no God would do this to you, meaning to me at that point. So, I still feel as committed and as connected to the religion, and maybe even a tad more because of how much joy it brought Dalia. And primarily that was in the music and the community. She just loved it. And throwing her bat mitzvah was one of the most meaningful things that I've ever done in my life. And, those are memories that are so intrinsic to my life now.
Are you thinking of doing anything with all of your now honed medical skills? Like, I'm waiting for you to go back to med school and become a surgeon. I don't know.
It's funny. I actually know several moms who did go to medical school or nursing school when their child got some kind of horrible illness. I'm like so done with that. I have no interest. I mean, I feel like I am kind of an EMT now because I went through the program with my eldest to kind of help along.
Yep.
So I feel like I am an EMT, though I'm not actually certified. No, I have zero interest. I have zero interest in care. This is going to sound awful, but it's like caring for other. I'm like, I did that. No, done.
And how, not that this is any of my business, but because you wrote a lot about your relationship in the book and all of that, how is your marriage?
I am talk about thanking God. I'm like, I won't blame God for all the shitty stuff, for all the bad stuff that's happened. Sorry.
It's okay.
But I'm happy to thank God for the blessing of putting my husband and me together, because I do think that is one of the major ways that, we got through and that I've gotten through. He was just the most miraculous caregiver and partner and human. I don't know, Zibby, I saw you talking at one of your events about your husband and, it was radiating the kind of joy and connection. And I feel blessed to have something that seems like that too. And, I feel really lucky because we know that the majority of couples who have a child with a disability, let alone child loss and rare disease, split up more than half. And I can see why. I mean, I absolutely can see why. I think maybe the rest who don't end up inextricably linked. And also we were always we're too tired to think about going off with anybody else. Who had the energy? Nobody will ever understand our lives now except each other. So we're doing great.
Excellent. I'm glad for that. And how about words? You use language to cope, to share, to educate, all of it. How do you feel about writing at this point? As a healer, as a friend, what is your relationship like?
I love it and have become more and more connected to writing as not only for myself as a way to share, to bear witness to, so many people have questions about, I don't know how to act around this, or I
Mhm.
feel like I have this lived experience that it's on me to share, but
Mhm.
also to write fun, lighter stuff.
Mhm.
It's interesting. My father was a writer, and he wrote a memoir when my sister died, and it came out, decades ago. But he was a very, very gifted writer. And I think that I kind of watched that, and maybe like a teeny little bit came down to me. But that is really where a lot of my focus is now, is how can I tell the stories that, I've got a lot of stories to tell. So
Oh, that's exciting.
yeah.
Really exciting. What was the hardest part to write in the story?
Well, the easiest part to write was the epilogue, and which is kind of weird, but I wrote that in one sitting. It just poured out of me.
Wow.
I think probably the hardest parts were some of those really, really thorny things that happened in the hospital,
Mhm.
because, of course, I had to bring myself back to the trauma. On
Mhm.
the other hand, I could walk away. So when I was in the hospital, for example, Dalia was in the PICU in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 months, and so were we, therefore. And there was no leaving. There was no break. There was no
Mhm.
nothing. And writing about it was really, really hard because I had to go back to room 646 where so much had happened. But on the other hand, I could put down the computer and go out for a walk, or, go have a coffee. And so I could leave. So I think it was the hardest probably, but at least I was able to get away from it a little bit. And I think maybe that helped in the healing, because I was able to revisit it, but then also, again, walk away to a more quote unquote normal situation.
Wow. What advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Oh, I have a lot of advice for
Okay,
aspiring authors.
let's
So
go.
first of all, I think everybody should believe that they have a story worth telling, that their writing is worthy. I meet so many people who are like, well, who would want to read anything I wrote? And it's like, don't think that way. Like, your story is worth being written. Your story is worth being heard. So that's number one. Number two, try and get in a habit. Right. And so it's whatever the habit is, it's not necessarily, I'm not like, you got to do your morning pages. But I think that if you can have some kind of, even if it's every Tuesday from 6 to 7, and hold yourself accountable, break it up into bite-sized pieces. I always do that. Even if it's an essay, I'll be like, I know this essay is going to need to be 1,000 words. I'm going to sit and do 500 words, And then I think connecting with other authors is so important and great. And again, I've met a lot of people who are now really special people in my life, other writers at events that you've put on. And I'm really grateful for that. In fact, I have, for this book, an event coming up in Boston, and there's a panel of us. There's 3 of us who have written books and a moderator. All of the 4 of us met at your book for your memoir. I mean, excuse me, at your event for your memoir.
Oh,
Yeah. And we now cheer each other on, So I think having other people in your life who get it, if you're an aspiring author, is so important and so fun.
that's great. Well, that's so wonderful. I'm really
Yeah.
excited to hear that. When is the event? I'll try to come.
Oh, yes, you should. Jean Steele, who interviewed you, is
Yep,
our
yep.
moderator. So that event is
Oh,
on Newbury Street on the 9th of May.
I wish. Well, congratulations.
So thank you. But yeah, I think aspiring authors, just sit down and start writing.
Sounds easy, and yet not always so much. Well, Jessica, thank you so much. Thanks for all of your support. Thanks for sharing yourself so openly on the page and reminding all the readers that you and we can get through anything.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social at Zibby Owens and at Zibby Readers.